Jacob, a man who loved deeply and whose heart belonged to one woman above all, Rachel. After years of waiting, Rachel finally bore him a son, Joseph. Because Joseph was the child of Jacob's beloved Rachel, he became Jacob's treasure, a constant reminder of the love he shared with her. Jacob showered Joseph with affection, making him a coat of many colors, a symbol of his father's deep love and pride. This favoritism, however, stirred up resentment in his other sons. Joseph is the 11th son of Jacob, a man blessed by God but living amidst family rivalry. His father, Jacob, favors Joseph, which creates tension with his brothers. As Joseph grew into a young man, he began to experience dreams that were vivid, strange, and filled with mystery. These dreams came to him as whispers from a distant place, drawing him into a world of symbols he couldn't yet understand. One night, Joseph dreamt that he and his brothers were in a field, binding sheaves of grain. In his dream, his brothers' sheaves gathered around his and then bowed down before it. Eagerly, Joseph shared his dream the next morning. "Listen to this dream I had," he said to his brothers. He described the scene, thinking they might marvel at the dream's mystery, but his brothers only scoffed. "Do you really think you will reign over us? That you will have dominion over us?" They retorted, their hearts hardening with resentment. Then, not long after, Joseph dreamt again. This time he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing before him. He recounted the dream to his father Jacob and his brothers. Jacob, though he loved Joseph, questioned him. "Will your mother, your brothers, and I indeed bow down to you?" But deep inside, Jacob felt a strange stirring, wondering if perhaps these dreams held some divine meaning. The tension between Joseph and his brothers continued to simmer, fueled by jealousy and bitterness. They resented the way their father adored him, the coat of many colors, and most of all, his dreams. So, when they saw Joseph approaching one day, their hearts filled with anger, and they seized upon the opportunity. Jacob had sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were far away in the fields tending to their flocks. Eager to serve his father, Joseph set out, not knowing what awaited him. From a distance, his brothers recognized him, the bright colors of his coat betraying his approach. They exchanged glances, each knowing the other shared the same thought. "Here comes that dreamer," one of them sneered, a cruel smile on his lips. They quickly hatched a plan. "Let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits," they conspired. "We can say a wild animal devoured him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, felt a pang of guilt and urged them not to shed blood. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Secretly, Reuben hoped to return later and rescue Joseph. When Joseph reached them, he greeted his brothers with a smile, but they grabbed him roughly. His heart must have pounded with fear as he saw the hatred in their eyes. They ripped off his beautiful coat and threw him into an empty, dark pit, the shock of betrayal settling over him. His brothers sat down to eat, ignoring his cries from below. Their cold indifference cut as deeply as the betrayal itself. As they were eating, they noticed a caravan of Ishmaelite traders approaching from the distance, their camels laden with spices bound for Egypt. Judah, another of Joseph's brothers, saw an opportunity. "What will we gain by killing our brother?" he reasoned. "Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites instead. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed, and together they hauled Joseph out of the pit. Frightened and helpless, Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver, taken as a slave to a foreign land. Once in Egypt, Joseph found himself in a land of strange customs, unfamiliar language, and an uncertain future. Sold as a slave, he was purchased by Potiphar, a powerful officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Despite his new status as a servant, Joseph worked diligently, his heart steadfast in his trust in God. Though far from home and without family, he held on to his faith, drawing strength from the belief that God was with him. Over time, Potiphar noticed Joseph's work ethic and the extraordinary success that seemed to follow him. No matter what task he was given, Joseph excelled and Potiphar's household began to thrive. Grateful for Joseph's efforts and impressed by his honesty, Potiphar elevated him to oversee his entire household. He entrusted Joseph with everything he owned, from managing the servants to taking care of his possessions and affairs. Joseph, now a respected steward, was responsible for Potiphar's wealth and property, enjoying a degree of influence he could never have imagined. Yet Potiphar's wife persisted, her desire turning to frustration and anger. One day, when no one else was in the house, she seized him by his cloak, attempting once more to seduce him. In a desperate effort to escape, Joseph pulled away, leaving his cloak in her hands, and fled outside. His rejection enraged her, and she crafted a plan to retaliate. Screaming, she called for the household servants and accused Joseph, claiming he had tried to assault her. Holding up his cloak as proof, she told her husband, Potiphar, that Joseph had tried to take advantage of her. Potiphar, furious and feeling betrayed, had Joseph thrown into prison. Once again, Joseph found himself in a pit, not a physical one like before, but a prison cell, a place of darkness and uncertainty. Despite his faithfulness and integrity, he was punished for a crime he did not commit. Thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit, Joseph could have despaired, but instead he clung to his faith. Though the walls were confining and the future uncertain, Joseph's integrity remained unwavering. Even in the dark corridors of the prison, God was with him, and his faithfulness did not go unnoticed. The prison warden saw something unique in Joseph, a quiet strength, a sense of peace, and a diligence that inspired trust. Before long, Joseph was given responsibilities, and the warden placed him in charge of other prisoners, allowing him some freedom within the prison's bounds. It was clear that, though in captivity, God's hand was still upon him. One day, Joseph encountered two new prisoners, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, both high-ranking servants who had fallen out of Pharaoh's favor. Though strangers, they soon confided in Joseph, for he treated them with kindness and compassion. One morning, Joseph noticed a change in their demeanor. They looked troubled, and he asked them why. Both had experienced strange, unsettling dreams the night before, dreams that haunted them in the daylight. Seeing their distress, Joseph offered them comfort. "Doesn't interpretation belong to God?" he said, encouraging them to share their dreams, trusting that God would provide him with understanding. The cupbearer spoke first. "In my dream," he began, "I saw a vine before me. On the vine were 3 branches. As it budded, it blossomed and its clusters ripened into grapes. I held Pharaoh's cup in my hand, took the grapes, and squeezed them into the cup, placing it in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph listened intently, then replied, "This is what your dream means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You will once again place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do." Joseph added a request, saying, "When you are free, remember me and show me kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh, so I may get out of this prison." Encouraged by the favorable interpretation, the baker daily shared his own dream. "In my dream, I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them from the basket on my head." Joseph's expression grew somber. "This is the interpretation," he began carefully. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole. The birds will eat away your flesh." Though the words were difficult to speak, Joseph heeded, not shy away from the truth. 3 days later, Joseph's interpretations came to pass exactly as he had said. Pharaoh restored the cupbearer to his position, but the baker was executed, just as Joseph had foretold. Yet despite the accuracy of his interpretation and the promise of the cupbearer, Joseph was forgotten, left to endure the isolation of the prison. Though forgotten by man, Joseph was not forgotten by God, who too continued to prepare him for a destiny beyond the walls of his confinement. 2 years passed since Joseph interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. During that time, Joseph remained in the prison, living each day with faith that God had not forgotten him. Then one night, far beyond the prison walls in the grandeur of Pharaoh's palace, something extraordinary occurred. Pharaoh had 2 troubling dreams that would disturb him to his core. In his first dream, Pharaoh saw himself standing by the Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt. As he watched, 7 sleek, fat cows emerged from the river and grazed on the lush reeds. But soon, 7 other cows, gaunt and emaciated, rose from the Nile and stood beside the healthy ones. The sickly cows devoured the fat, healthy cows, yet remained as gaunt as before. Startled, Pharaoh awoke, shaken by the vividness of the vision. He soon fell asleep again, only to be greeted by another strange dream. This time he saw 7 plump, ripe ears of grain growing on a single stalk. Then 7 thin, scorched ears sprouted and swallowed up the healthy ones. Pharaoh awoke, troubled and unable to shake the disturbing images. He summoned Egypt's magicians and wise men, yet none could explain the meaning of these dreams. They too were baffled, leaving Pharaoh even more distressed. As word of his distress spread, the cupbearer, standing by Pharaoh's side, suddenly remembered the young Hebrew man from the prison, the one who had accurately interpreted his own dream 2 years earlier. Overcome with remorse for his forgetfulness, the cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. When Pharaoh was angry with me and the chief baker, we were placed in the custody of the captain of the guard. There a young Hebrew interpreted our dreams, and everything happened just as he said. He could surely interpret Pharaoh's dreams." Pharaoh immediately ordered that Joseph be brought from the prison. The guards retrieved Joseph, and he was bathed, shaved, and he was bathed, shaved, and dressed in fine clothes, then escorted to Pharaoh's royal chambers. Standing before the most powerful man in Egypt, Joseph remained calm, prepared to speak the truth as God revealed it to him. Pharaoh addressed him, saying, "I've had a dream and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said that when you hear a dream you can interpret it." With humility, Joseph replied, "I cannot do it." But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. He made it clear that the wisdom he possessed was not his own but from God. Pharaoh then recounted both dreams in detail, the cows by the Nile and the ears of grain. Listening intently, Joseph discerned the meaning that God was revealing. He looked at Pharaoh and said, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 good ears of grain represent 7 years of abundance, but the 7 gaunt cows and the 7 scorched ears represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The famine will be so severe that the years of abundance will be forgotten and the land will be ravaged." Pharaoh and his court listened in stunned silence as Joseph continued. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and he will do it soon. Therefore, Pharaoh should look for a discerning and wise man to take charge of the land of Egypt. Let him appoint commissioners to gather 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 years of abundance, storing the grain in cities to be kept in reserve for the years of famine. This way, the land will not perish during the famine. Pharaoh was astounded not only by the clarity of Joseph's interpretation, but also by his wisdom and insight. Turning to his officials, he asked, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Seeing that Joseph had been divinely guided, Pharaoh made a momentous decision. "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." In that instant, Joseph's life changed. Pharaoh placed his signet ring on Joseph's finger, dressed him in fine linen, and hung a gold chain around his neck. He appointed Joseph as second in command over all of Egypt. charging him with preparing the nation for the years of abundance and famine to come. At Pharaoh's command, Joseph rode in a chariot through the streets, and people bowed before him, acknowledging his newfound authority. Joseph had gone from prisoner to prince, from forgotten to exalted, in a single day. Through his trials and steadfast faith, God had prepared him for this moment, placing him in a position not just to survive but to save an entire nation. He now stood as a beacon of hope, not only for Egypt but also for the world, as he set about the task of saving countless lives from the impending famine. As Joseph predicted, the 7 years of abundance were followed by severe famine. The lack of food spread far and wide, affecting not only Egypt but the surrounding regions, including Canaan, where Joseph's father, Jacob, and his brothers lived. Soon, they felt the desperation that gripped the land, and news spread that Egypt alone had grain stored in abundance. Jacob, hearing of this, called his sons and said, "Why do you just keep looking at each other? I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." With heavy hearts, 10 of Joseph's brothers set out on the journey to Egypt, unaware of the extraordinary encounter awaiting them. Upon their arrival, they were led to the Egyptian official who oversaw the distribution of grain. When they entered the room, they knelt before him, just as the dream of sheaves bowing down had foretold years before. The man they knelt before was their own brother, Joseph, now a powerful ruler and dressed in the finery of Egypt. Joseph recognized them instantly, but he concealed his identity. His heart must have leapt within him at the sight of his brothers, those who had betrayed him, yet whom he still loved. He spoke to them through an interpreter, asking sternly, "Where do you come from?" They replied, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Although he knew the answer, he probed them further, accusing them of being spies to test their intentions. They pleaded, explaining their situation, mentioning their aging father and their youngest brother, Benjamin, who had stayed behind. Hearing them speak of his father and younger brother touched Joseph deeply. He decided to test them, to see if their hearts had changed since the day they sold him into slavery. He imprisoned them for 3 days and then released them, except for Simeon, whom he kept as a hostage. He commanded them to return home and bring their youngest brother to him to prove their honesty. As they spoke among themselves, they did not realize that Joseph understood their words. They expressed guilt over what they had done to Joseph, saying, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us." Joseph, hearing their remorse, turned away and wept, but he quickly regained his composure and sent them back to Canaan with grain, secretly returning their silver in their sacks. Back in Canaan, the brothers told Jacob of their encounter with the Egyptian ruler and the demand to bring Benjamin. At first, Jacob resisted, unwilling to risk the life of his youngest son. But as the famine worsened and their supplies ran low again, he had no choice but to relent. Reluctantly, he allowed Benjamin to accompany his brothers back to Egypt, entrusting his beloved son to God's protection. Upon their return, Joseph was moved at the sight of Benjamin, the only other son of Rachel, his mother. Holding back his emotions, he invited them to a meal in his own home, where they marveled at the lavishness of their treatment. Still, he tested them one last time, secretly placing his silver cup in Benjamin's sack before they departed. As they left the city, Joseph's steward stopped them and accused them of theft. When the cup was discovered in Benjamin's sack, the brothers were devastated, and they returned to Joseph's presence, bowing before him and begging for mercy. Joseph witnessed a profound change in them. Judah, who had once been complicit in his betrayal, stepped forward and offered to take Benjamin's place as a slave, so that their father would not suffer the grief of losing his youngest son. This selfless act revealed the transformation in their hearts. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, Joseph ordered everyone to leave the room, except for his brothers. Overcome with emotion, he broke down, weeping so loudly that his cries echoed throughout the palace. He then looked at his brothers and, in their own language, revealed his identity. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" His brothers were stunned, paralyzed with shock and fear. They could hardly believe their eyes or ears. Seeing their terror, Joseph spoke gently to reassure them. "Come close to me," he said. As they approached, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no ploughing or harvesting. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." After this emotional reunion, Joseph sent his brothers back to Canaan to bring their father, Jacob, and all their families to Egypt. When they returned to Canaan and told their father that Joseph was alive, Jacob was stunned. At first he could not believe it, but as he listened to their story and saw the wagons Joseph had sent, his spirit revived and he exclaimed, "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The family journeyed to Egypt, where Joseph awaited them with open arms. When Jacob saw his beloved son after all those years, they embraced, tears flowing freely. For Jacob, it was a miracle, an unexpected joy that brought peace and fulfillment to his final years. Pharaoh welcomed Joseph's family warmly, granting them fertile land in Goshen, where they could prosper and live in peace. And as the years passed, Joseph reflected on his life. He recognized that God had been with him through every twist and turn, transforming his suffering into a divine plan for the survival of his family and the future of Israel. Speaking to his brothers, he said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." He reassured them of his love and forgiveness, and they lived together as a family, reconciled and at peace, with the painful past now a part of a beautiful and purposeful journey.